Hi, my name's Pete, welcome to the channel. This episode we are on the Yorkshire coast, East Yorkshire, and we are looking for the remains of a World War I submarine, HMS G3. I'm out with my friend and my brother, so you may see them in the background in some of the shots. Hopefully we're going to be able to make it down there. It's quite a long walk. We've been walking about an hour and a half already down the beach, and as you can see from some of the footage there behind me, there's my friend and my brother. It is quite rough going for, well, about half of it so far. Cliffs behind me, well over 100 feet tall, and at the moment we're just hoping to get there before low tide arrives. Now, when you come to, if you ever think about coming here, don't come without checking the low tide. I've got an expert with me, my brother. He does scuba diving, and he's been able to help me with the low tide and slack water and all that kind of stuff. So we'll get down there and we'll see what remains of that submarine, and I'll tell you a little bit about it while we walk down. The North Sea was a crucial battleground during World War I, with naval forces from both the Allied and Central Powers clashing in fierce battles. But the impact of the war on the North Sea and its surrounding countries extended far beyond combat. In this video, we will take a deep dive into the history of the submarine HMS G3 in the North Sea during World War I. In the midst of the First World War, German U-boats controlled the North Sea, wreaking havoc and terrorising Allied ships. World War I was a conflict like no other. The role of the submarines in the North Sea was hugely important. Submarines were a relatively new weapon during the war, and both sides used them extensively in the waters around the British Isles. The German Navy employed their submarines in an attempt to disrupt the flow of merchant shipping to Britain, while the British used their submarines to disrupt German naval operations. The German U-boats were particularly effective in their attempts to disrupt merchant shipping. They would lurk beneath the waves and wait for the merchant ships to pass before surfacing and attacking them. This caused immense disruption to Britain's supply lines, and soon the country was facing severe shortage of supplies and resources. The British also used submarines of their own, mainly in the North Sea. These submarines were smaller and less well armed than the German U-boats, but they were still a formidable weapon. They were used to harass German naval vessels to disrupt their operations. Enter the Royal Navy's G-class diesel-electric submarines. These were launched between 1914 and 1917 and intended for operations in the North Sea and German Bight in World War I against German U-boats. The submarines had a partial double hull, a length of 187 feet 1 inch and a beam of 22 feet 8 inches. Most of their class had bows raised during the war to increase buoyancy to improve safekeeping. For surface running, the boats were nearly all powered by two 800 brake horsepower Vickers 2-stroke 8-cylinder diesel engines, each driving one propeller shaft, as we'll see on the wreck when we approach it. The boats had a complement of 30 crew, including officers and a captain. The armament was 4 18-inch torpedo tubes and one 21-inch torpedo tube and one 3-inch deck gun. The HMS G3 is a submarine we're going to go see, or the wreck of, and it was one of 14 built. 15 were planned, but the last one was cancelled. The HMS G3 was launched on the 22nd of January 1916. She was a G-class patrol submarine built at Chatham during the First World War, 35 miles from London. It's a famous shipyard, and it's been in use from 1567 up to 1984, and it has built such ships as the HMS Victory. Like the rest of her class, G3's role was to patrol an area of the North Sea in search of German U-boats. HMS G3 had a quiet time in the First World War, patrolling the North Sea and lying in wait for U-boats returning from the western approaches. Come the end of the First World War, G3, like the rest of the G-class, was surplus to requirements and decommissioned in 1918. Throughout her life she had 5 captains, 3 of which were during wartime. At the end of the war, while the rest of the G-class submarines were being decommissioned, G3 was one of 6 G-class submarines held in reserve at Portsmouth as part of the L Group under the collective command of Lieutenant Humphrey G. Veal. And then on the 4th of November in 1921, HMS G3 was sold to Young's in Sunderland for scrapping. The vessel was towed awash because this was the practical method and had a passage crew of 3 on board. Off Scarborough, a storm blew up and the passage crew were taken off. The tow was slipped and the following day the submarine washed up on the North Beach at Scarborough. 3 days later, G3 was successfully pulled off and the tow resumed. With Whitby on the port beam, further rough weather led to the tow being slipped again. This time the rogue submarine came ashore upon a rocky bar in Caton Bay and refloated a few days later again. She proceeded northwards. Now a real northeasterly gale set in. Well north of Whitby they again slipped G3. This time they lost sight of her, and for 3 days she was adrift, unmanned, in the busy North Sea Passage. The following morning the submarine was sighted by Filey. Coastguards thought she was drifting onto Filey Brig. However, G3 drifted across Filey Bay to her final resting place on the White Rocks below Speeton Cliffs, which is where she rests today. An expert tug crew came across her and assessed and decided she was best left where she lay, so they departed, claiming the insurance. We now have a complete submarine, except for armaments and propellers residing on the White Rocks. All hatches had been secured by the passage crew and no water had entered the hull. Despite extensive pounding by the seas, her strong submarine hull prevented any breaking up. It was possible to walk along the submarine at certain times, but only for a very limited period due to the tides. Now this was a problem for us. We were racing down there to get to this submarine to see the remains of what's there today. At this point a man called Jack Webster entered. He's been described as being 6'2" of pure muscle. He had for the last few years been involved in the salvage of scuttled German fleet at Scapa Flow, where his knowledge of explosives came in useful. Jack always had an eye for business. He had viewed the submarine with enthusiasm but lacked the capital for such a venture. Finally he approached Frederick William Parker, a local businessman who had extensive engineering complex at Hunnaby, together with 2 detached houses. His idea was, by selling Mr. Parker the 2 large generator motors from the submarine, submarines ran on electric power while submerged, that would be 1 generator with a second generator with 100% spares. This could drive the machinery at Hunnaby, as Hunnaby did not get mains electric until 1931. Nearly 10 years after this offer was made, Mr. Parker agreed that the idea was excellent, but being an astute businessman, he insisted the electric motors were brought to the top of the 300-foot Speeton Cliff in sections before any money would change hands. Mr. Webster was a practical man. He bought the submarine in situ from the insurance company for a few pounds, and with the submarine listing on her port side, he blasted his way down through the conning tower and promptly blew out the port side of the hull. This enabled him to dismantle the electric motors by using rollers to detach them and get them to the bottom of the cliffs. He was often assisted by his 3 teenager sons. Now the problem was to raise the motors to the top of the sheer 300-foot cliff face, borrowing the climbers' ropes which were used at Bempton Cliffs to steal the rare bird eggs from the nests on the cliff face. He obtained a wheel and secured it to the cliff edge, and he hired a horse from a friendly farmer, and for 2 days he promptly lifted the motors to the top of the cliffs. Here Frederick Parker sent one of his trackless engines with a trailer, and the deal was done. Now with a little capital, Jack bought an old pulling boat and began to scrap every valuable metal from the ship that he could reach, such as copper and brass. Once he had completed the stripping of the valuable items, the G3 was left like a stranded whale to rot away. The G3's motors continued in operation up until the 1950s. The submarine remained in situ as almost a complete hull up until 1940. One of the photos that I'll be putting up at the end will show you of what this submarine looked like during the 1930s. She remained a visual item there, with people coming to visit her, coming to see her, and then when I mentioned 1940, the military came along and blew up all recognisable landmarks in an effort to confuse an invading force. Now, as we look around the wreck, you can see some recognisable parts, and we'll go there now and we'll have a look round. We're still heading down looking for HMS G3. I'll turn the camera around, I'll show you what this is like. It's really rough going. Well, we're on our way to the HMS G3. We've come across our first air tank. Just a little bit further now and we'll see what else remains. So just a little bit further on from where I was, you can see this terrain is really hard going. It's probably taken us about 15-20 minutes to cover about 100 yards, 200 yards, and we've come across another air tank. Turn the camera around and have a look at this one. Here we are, here's the second air tank. Now at the ends here must be inlets and outlets. You can see how thick these casings are. That metal. Trying to show you, because they would have had to cope for some pressure. So that's what this end looks like. You can see how wet and slippery these rocks are. I have got to do my best not to slip down. And there we go, at that end it's got some kind of nipple on it. I will turn you around, you'll see my brother and my friend over there. That is how far away I am from the submarine. We'll get over there and we'll have a look. So I've made it to the stern of the ship, and I think this is what remains of the propeller. We can see the shape of it there. We can see some going down in here, that piece up there, and there'll be another one at the other side there with 3 blades. Now you can see how slippery these rocks are. I'll take you up the craft and I'll show you some more of the ship. That is our prop down there, which you can see here, and then we've got remains of what's the rudder here, and we can just see the skin there. Inside we can see part of the prop shaft. If I go this way here, you can see more of the prop shaft there, which is leading up to the engine. Now this is the remains of our rudder. Just in there is the remains of our propeller, and this is the bottom of the hull. We can see the shape of this here. We can see the prop shaft going through there, encasement here, and it is covered in bronze. We can see that there. And again we can see this is the absolute bottom of the hull. I'm going to turn the camera around. We can see an air tank that's displaced because that is in the engine. Now I have to be really careful because this is super slippy. Again we can see the shape of the hull going down underneath and up this side. Now I am actually stood in where the engine was. It's all displaced. There's our drive shaft. There we've got more ballast tank, and we can see the size of this drive cog here, that gearing. And this looks like a piston, or part of the assembly, with some more ballast tanks. Again, this is all gearing, part of the gearbox. And here we've got a bit quite nicely intact remaining with likely the gear casing, gear housing. We've got the size of this metal here is just unbelievable how thick that is. And we've got more ballast tanks down there. I'm just going to try and get a little bit further up now. Because up here is where we have the crankshaft, and the size of this is just huge. Look at that. That would have been part of this assembly here. Absolutely destroyed from the explosion of when it was taken apart. Now I'm going to have to switch the camera off, get up that side, and we'll show you what's left up there. To get the sense of the scale with this thing, it is impossible. It goes from right down here all the way along here, engine bay being in there, my brother there, you can see how far away he is, and you've got my buddy who is almost at the bow but not quite. And that is the wreck of the HMS G3 World War I submarine. It certainly caused a stir when it grounded around here. There are some photographs of it. I will put those up for you again as we leave the video. In the meantime, if you enjoyed that, please like, share and subscribe.